special episode. We have the CEO of Cardano Foundation, Frederik Gregaard, here with us. I said it right, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. I mean,
perfect.
in the English format, if you want to go Danish,
Mhm.
then it's a little bit more like a potato in your mouth, but I'm
Ah,
totally fine with that.
okay, but I want to hear it. Can you say it?
Frederik Gregaard.
Okay, making a note. Okay, so speaking of Danish, can you tell me about some of your time in Denmark? Because I've never been there and I love traveling.
Yeah, so I've been abroad for a long time now, I think 12, 13 years. But yeah, so Denmark, couple of interesting facts about Denmark is one of the largest countries in the world and one of the smallest at the same time.
Mm,
So what a lot of people actually don't know is that technically speaking, we own Greenland,
okay.
which obviously now in all this changes of global warming and all of that becomes a very interesting question around where the tectonic plates are coming, but also about oil and sustainability and culture and other things.
Mhm.
So suddenly little Denmark, which is actually quite small, becomes a part of a very big political debate,
Mm.
which is very interesting. And I think, from a governance perspective, it's even more interesting because how can you agree on something which suddenly not anymore is just a lump of ice, but suddenly is, a huge economic opportunity,
Mhm.
but it's also a testimony to, what the world should not be in terms of, who takes control over it and who has the most power and the most money and
Mhm. Mhm.
what, and so forth. So yeah, so that's probably one fact a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
Another fact which a lot of people don't know, which I kind of like a lot and is very scared about at the same time, is that
Mhm.
we have a very good digital ID.
Okay.
So we try different solutions in Denmark, and you can argue how good it is and so on, right? But the matter of the fact is the adoption rate is huge.
Mhm.
So the government basically went out and said everybody needs to have a digital ID, and
Mhm.
this is basically our provider/providers,
Mhm.
and that means that the adoption rate is over 90%.
Wow.
So literally everybody has a way to digitally identify themselves and digitally identify transactions,
Mhm.
authenticity online,
Oh, wow.
which basically changes the game a lot.
Yeah.
And then they combine that also together with, which is for me as also being a Swiss person,
Mhm.
a very scary situation, is that all government entities speak together.
Okay.
So basically there is, all the ledgers is connected to each other. So your pension scheme knows what your health insurance scheme knows what the state knows, what your
Mhm.
bank knows. So everything is kind of being molded together in large chunks of ledgers.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you could say that you're not very private in Denmark, but the Danish citizens actually don't see it like that. They just see it as an advanced service offering from the state that they don't actually have to do their taxes and so on. So if you're kind of a complicated person, you still have to do some things, but
Mhm.
in general, there's a lot of things kind of connecting and speaking together. And the last but not least is probably that there's I think 400 or 500 different islands in
Mm.
Denmark,
Mhm.
but only 70 is inhabited.
Okay.
So it's actually if you hit the Danish weather at the right time,
Mhm.
you can both you can find your own island and you can have a little holiday there where nobody would ever come and visit you. Uh,
That's good for this COVID time. Just go be by yourself.
yeah, essentially, yeah.
Mhm.
So it also holds a lot of opportunities and problems around that again, but it's kind
Mhm.
of interesting. It's such a large country and it's still such a small country, you can think.
Yeah. So what's the best time of year to go visit holiday for Denmark?
So if it's not COVID,
Mhm.
you only have two options
Okay.
basically. You have sort of mid-December
Mhm.
and around Christmas. Then the whole Danish population, they basically dress up the buildings and everybody do something that's called hygge, which
Mhm.
cannot really be translated as close to coziness.
Mm.
And it's a time of year where people come together and spend time with their families and spend time with their friends. And we have a lot of traditions around that.
Mhm.
And specifically the larger cities is really turned into like huge social gathering places where people interact and is together. Obviously here in COVID, I guess I haven't been in Denmark,
Mhm.
but I think it's quite different. And
Mhm.
the other window of opportunity is when the weather is good in the summer, but
Okay.
you just don't know when that is. So there's 1 to 2 months where the weather is quite stable and
Mhm.
amazing to be outside. And there, we have a lot of coastline, a lot of beaches. We have a lot of, the whole Danish society turns upside down for those 2 months,
Mhm.
but you just don't know when it is. It can
Mm.
be June, July, it can be July, August, it can be August, September.
Mhm.
You just don't know. And at
Yeah.
that time, the whole population goes from being very kind of nearly introvert and very closed as a community to
Mhm.
being extremely extrovert, and all the cafes and everybody's eating outside and meeting new people. And, it's like a total, like nearly like 360-degree turnaround
Mhm.
in those 2 months. So I would say, the Christmas time around now, and then, around the summertime, that's the
Yeah.
time you have to be in Denmark.
It's so interesting. Like the culture is interesting. I would love to visit someday. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, in Korea we have monsoon season, which is consistently August and September. Don't come during then. Don't come. It just doesn't stop raining.
Okay.
But like I love the rain, so I don't mind. But then people are just they get depressed when it just rains like that all the time. And it's not light rain. It's a lot of rain, you know. So
Okay.
monsooning is something else. So um but I've done a little bit of background, looking into your background a little bit, because honestly, like I'm pretty new to this space. I've only been here since July. And so getting to know all these people, getting to know the community, and then you're kind of recent in your transition into Cardano Foundation. And so I had to do a lot of research because I didn't even know what to really ask. And I'm kind of overwhelmed. But something that was interesting to me is like where you did come from, and like the colleagues that you would have. What do your colleagues think of the ones that are in the financial world? What do they think about blockchain and Cardano? And like, what do you guys talk about when you're just around, like, cocktail parties or water cooler or whatever, when you're talking about this kind of stuff?
So my old colleagues outside of, let's say, outside Cardano,
Mm,
yeah. So that's a very good question. So most of my colleagues only know Cardano because I joined.
hmm.
So in the financial world around infrastructure, Cardano is not yet a name.
Okay.
So the fact that I joined there led to a lot of questions from my colleagues
Hmm.
about, what is the rationale?
Hmm.
Why would I do such a thing like that?
Hmm.
Well, why does that make sense? And when I then start to explain to them what I'm up to, they say, "Oh, that fits perfectly with you.
Mm.
That's exactly who you are, and that's exactly the right place." But there is some worries around, a project who's been around for 5 years, very much focused on the financial operating system,
Mhm,
why the banks and the infrastructure providers, the capital markets experts, the exchanges never heard about that name before.
mhm, mhm,
So that leads definitely to some questions after I announced that I joined.
mhm,
But it also leads to some very interesting discussions, because people do know that I'm very deep into the rails and the nuts and the bolts of insurance companies, banks, and exchanges.
mhm,
So when we then start speaking about, why and what that could actually mean,
mhm,
and how we can actually create a better world, and how proud I am to be a banker who has an opportunity to work full time on a project where we actually literally can create a much better world for the
mhm,
7 billion people who inhabit it. A world where we actually come together as a unity and agree on what the big problems are and take some decisions towards solving those. A world where people can own their own, not just identity, but economic identity,
mhm,
which means that we are not locked into 100 years of safeguarding consumers around financial services. So
mhm,
the how we do it in banking today is that you kind of have to prove that you are, able to get that you are a sound person and sound individual, and that you can get a mortgage, for instance. And that
right.
can be really, really hard.
Mhm,
It can be really hard and very terrifying if you're coming out of college, or you're coming out of, your family has been farmers your whole life. You never had the need for having a passport. You never had the need for governmental identity card. And then suddenly you have the one idea who can solve a big problem in your local community, and you want to have financing for that. Then the traditional finance community will not welcome you with open arms. They will not even know what to do with you, because we're basically, we are in a world which is, we've been mitigating a lot of problems like anti-money laundering, like identity, like, Basel 2 and 3 around, tier 1 capital and capital requirements, and, all those things for such a long time. So we are not that inclusive as we could be.
Yeah.
And when we then start having those kind of discussions, then it actually turns out that a lot of people really agrees on that, but never really had the opportunities to start thinking about it, or always thought, oh, we cannot do anything about it. And hold and behold, then this beautiful blockchain technology comes and shows us with Bitcoin that some of the things actually can be done differently. And then now we're in the third, or maybe some would argue the fourth generation of these kind of technologies, right? And then the discussion becomes suddenly very real. It's not just about sustainable investments and green bonds, but it suddenly becomes about, what does impact actually look like? How do we measure impact? And then in my circle, it can become very nerdy, because I am coming from investment banking. So when we start speaking about inflation and deflation and how the world actually connects together, then you figure out that the system is actually, it's a bit flawed,
Yeah.
And it's not that obvious yet. But the more you look under it, you kind of start being a little bit scared. And I think, so that's some of the discussions we're having. And then besides that, obviously, I because I speak a lot in my job, and I also sometimes love to speak about the great outdoors. So I love mountains. I love to be outside. I love to hear people who is challenging themselves to do things they didn't think were possible. So at the water coolers, I tend to always speak a little bit and listen a little bit extra to people who speaks about challenging their mind and their bodies to achieve, for themselves, great achievements.
Yeah. Like, I'm really into nutrition, so I talk about that. So if I start talking about that, I'll never stop. Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
All of that is really wonderful. And I think that, you in your position and sharing with your colleagues, it's just going to lead to greater things, so I think it's great. So another question that I have is about Cardano Foundation, and like, you have IOG, you have Emergo. What exactly, like, in your terms, would you say Cardano Foundation's role is in that ecosystem?
Oh, yeah. So that's a question I get a lot. And I don't think I've perfected the answer yet. And it always comes in a little bit different context. And you put it in a little bit different context again. So I think about it as there is kind of two phases to what we're doing. So the phase one is where we are right now. And the job of IOG has been to do the research who made this academic blockchain possible, to program, operationalize, and deploy this first version of a fantastic third generation staking or proof of stake blockchain who can solve some of the problems I just spoke to about before. Our job in the foundation is to augment this, to help deploy this, to gather the community around this, but also to onboard the community as we go along, because we have one kind of community now, but we will have a totally different kind, or much bigger, much more inclusive community. When I say inclusive, it doesn't mean that everybody have to agree. It just means that we are going to get a lot more different voices into a community. Yeah. So that's kind of the first phase. And in that phase, it's also, it's very important for me that we also gain the trust of the community, of the users. And for me, it's when we speak about the community today, it's very often is the ADA holders or is the stake pool operators and those kind of person. But I'm very much focused around companies or individuals or digital autonomous organizations who in the future are going to build enterprise or life critical infrastructure or applications on our infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to run the whole vaccine program in Korea,
Mm-hmm.
would you run that on a centralized computer or would you run it on a decentralized computer?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how would you ensure that the people who get a vaccine actually can prove that they got the vaccine and they actually also can prove that there was the right thing into the actual ampoule which is shot into you?
Right.
How do you ensure that depending on what kind of vaccine it is, that you actually got the second one
Mm-hmm.
in the right, the right window of opportunity where you have to get it and so forth, right?
Yep.
So these kind of problems are really big problems to deal with.
Yeah.
And there it's our job as the Cardano Foundation also to build up the trust from all those entities like governance and hospitals and banks and insurance companies and capital markets and all kind of organizations and people, that they can trust this infrastructure, that they can trust this infrastructure will also be there in 50 years time.
Yeah.
That this is really like a principal infrastructure which they can build future business models and future governance models on.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second phase, which is when the product or the Cardano protocol is deployed and fully decentralized, then it's kind of shifting to be like a really community-led program. When I say really, it means that the governance also goes away from the founding entities, you can think about it like that, and it goes over to the community, and through Catalyst and the SIP process, the actual users can decide on the improvements and they can decide on when they want to release funding. And when that world comes very soon, it is also our job to ensure that we hold the blueprints and the libraries and the protocols and all of that. So anybody who want to, have the right assurance or have predictability that the code does what it's supposed to do, also after many community-led iterations, and also after other brilliant software companies have added to that code, that we actually update that kind of documentation. And we also show the art of the possible. What is really possible to do with blockchain? And I think that's a really hard question to answer, because it's really been a technology looking for a problem. Yeah. And I'd like to turn it upside down, zooming on the problem and then looking at the technology. And then last but not least, if you really give a full service, like a full sledge technology stack away for free, fully open source, I think there will be a lot of large enterprises who will stop buying that by IT companies and start using the Cardano stack, either on the mainnet or do a sidechain or a fork of it. And I think then it must also be the foundation's duty to ensure that we also do social good and high impact adoption on chain. And what I mean about that is that if it suddenly becomes a place where the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 1000 companies start really depending on Cardano, which I think is very, very likely, they are still optimized by shareholder return on shareholder equity, right? So how do we actually ensure that, like we spoke about before, that the farmers or the people, the entrepreneurs and the people, that they actually also have the ability to use this, so we can change society for good, that we can actually start not just measuring on GDP, but measuring on how is the community, how is the country, the people living in the country, what is the state of those people? Yeah. Is it going in the right direction? Because I think we've been measuring GDP for ages, but it doesn't say how mature and how well functioning and how democratized or how people are treated in that country. It doesn't say anything about that.
No, absolutely. And those are all like great things. And I think that in like the most ideal sense, that would be like perfect. But in your opinion, like, what do you think that is our weaknesses in Cardano that we have to work on to accomplish these things?
The weaknesses in Cardano or in the Cardano Foundation?
I would say like in Cardano.
I think the biggest weakness we have right now is that we need people to start building real applications on our protocol.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people has the perception that the protocol right now basically only holds ADA.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our version of a cryptocurrency, which has a lot of similarities to Bitcoin. I know a lot of people get angry when I say that, but functionally speaking, it is very similar from from what Bitcoin can do today. And I would like to turn that upside down and say, actually, already today you can do a lot more, which basically is not really happening. And as you probably saw the announcements last week, right? We now also opened a new DevNet, right?
Yep.
And I think you can build a lot already. So attracting developers and attracting real-time businesses and use cases where people build real applications, not proof of concept, not MVPs, but real applications on the Cardano stack is right now the weakness we have.
Okay.
But it's also a great opportunity. It's fantastic that we can be here right now with this level of quality which the Cardano protocol has, because we've seen this, blockchain has kind of come out of the cupboard now, and even large huge organizations start really seriously looking at it and building on it. So that we are now coming out with something with this big quality, which is you can also prove mathematically that it's working and has closed a lot of the loops, is a great opportunity. But it is also our weakness.
I did an interview recently with the CEO of Reach, who is a developer company, and he's fantastic. And I think that their company is fantastic. And with the recent announcements of Cardano, plus what Reach can do, I think it's coming quickly. So I'm excited for that.
You haven't seen anything yet. I mean, this is
Yeah.
we did a very small implementation of a supply chain use case, which we just did the technical part. It will go live very soon. But just by announcing that little wine company already got like huge requests for orders from other countries and stuff like that. And they're it's really coming now. I have to say.
Yeah. So I've had some questions just around like the SPO community, especially about the Cardano Foundation's community delegation, about like how does it work exactly, and do you guys do you mind sharing the delegation strategy that Cardano Foundation has for the you know what I mean, like how they're planning on, what is it, I don't remember the size of the wallets, but you guys are doing the community delegation. And I think I've asked a few people to explain to me what that is and how they're doing it, and I don't really get a good answer.
Yeah. So I guess the first point, which is where we are very different from other blockchain foundations, is that we actually run on a ADA/Bitcoin standard. So we keep all our treasury in ADA and Bitcoin and a couple of other cryptocurrencies, but we don't move it into fiat except if we have to pay salaries or pay for RFPs or whatever that is, right?
Okay.
And we have a very, compared to the size of ADA out there, we when the original distribution were made, we got a little bit less than 1% of the ADA, right? And that ADA we have in a set of wallets, and we have currently a little bit more than 40 wallets due to the change of the K factor. And what we have decided to do currently is that we are, as I said, we are focusing on augmentation and deployment of the Cardano protocol. So really a lot of the work what IOG is doing. And to do that, we've believed that we really need a very decentralized and very stable stake pool operator landscape. So we have taken the decision that we support small stake pool operators and we support stake pool operators where we believe, we cannot always know, but where we believe they only run one stake pool. And that's because we feel that a part of what we should be, going towards is not getting like huge mining conglomerates, and we should not kind of see a, like a centralization of the computing power around this. And that's also why the K factor will go further down, right? So it's kind of counterbalancing some of these things. So the first part is really about, we support pools who's not very well saturated, who seems to be, run by one person and doesn't, or a few person, and they don't have multiple pools. I think that's the first kind of design principle. Then the second design principle is it's for us, for it to make sense for the community. We made a vote in the community around that lately. The community says around a month or 4 to 6 weeks seems to be for them the minimum part, which is good for us because it actually takes us a long time to do these allocations because we are an audited and regulated entity. We cannot just sit in our offices and do this allocation. So we basically go to a location, a secure location where we have processes in place and everything is written down and it's then audited and so forth around that. So it takes us actually a long time to do so. So I think that's kind of, let's say, that's the main part of it, right? Then we have, as you've seen from IRG, right? They're also looking at right now actually giving allocations to pools around impact or sustainability. And I could very well imagine that we will also at one time would be looking at that. But for us, before we start doing that, it would be very important for us that we see that some of the pools actually also goes the next step. And what I mean about the next step is that they might need some help from us as well. I was just on the phone with a very cool stake pool operator the other week where we spoke about, they give a lot to charity. So they basically give a part of their proceeds to charity. And we spoke about how do we actually prove that you gave something to charity. And even further than that, how do you actually prove that the organization who got the ADA, that they actually use that on the right project? And even further than that, how do we actually ensure that the actual allocation was given to the people on the ground and was not just sucked away in marketing campaign and other things? So it's really about, fungible and non-fungible tokens really, right? So, what is the value of not just the money, but your money is going all the way downstream. And what we can do already today, and that's also maybe why I mentioned the wine case, right? Is the first step we can already do today. So the stake pool operator can already actually prove if the charity takes ADA, he can prove that the charity actually received that. And we can go to a very high security around that. The second part is that if you work, or if we would be working a little bit with the charity, you can actually, from their bookkeeping and accounting system, we can actually send a hash back all the way through the system. So a digital signature, which actually proves to the stake pool operator that the money actually went to the project which he wanted it to go to. So again, the fungible, non-fungible kind of component of this. Now, the last step, the last mile is where the most of the value will be captured, right? And that's where blockchain also is really struggling. Because let's face it, as long as we stay digital, and that's why it works very well with money, it's okay. But as soon as we get physical, then there's a big attack vector and a lot of error is handled there, right? And that last step is a part of where we will see that IoT will be merging with blockchain, and we also see a lot more, not just how you run a ledger, but also artificial intelligence and other kind of machine learning algorithms and other things who can bring conformity around the last mile. Because one thing is the rules you build, another thing is what's actually happening out there in the end. That's a couple of, let's say, thoughts we have around that. And then we also have to see, right, because the stake pool operator landscape is changing quite dramatically right now after the change of the K factor. But we would very much also like to kind of go even further on that journey on how we stake.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, you answered it great. I have a more complete picture now than the pieces that I've gathered from other colleagues. So yeah, I think we have time for one more question. So I do have a question about like, what is Cardano Foundation's like New Year's resolutions for 2021? Do you have any big goals and objectives, even for like the next 3 to 5 years? But just like a fun question, New Year's resolution for the next year.
Yeah, I mean, a New Year's resolution doesn't mean that it always goes, the right way in just 12 months, right? But
Right.
it's just a path you're taking. Or so
Mhm.
I would interpret it as a path I'm taking.
Mhm.
So I think I have maybe 3 New Year's resolutions or 3 buckets of New Year resolutions.
Mhm.
The first one is to onboard some really cool colleagues, specifically with engineering and technical skills,
Mhm.
and really, enhance our organization to be a high performance team who really make an impact on a world scale class.
Mhm.
So not just, how we run a really good foundation, but how we really become, an impact oriented foundation where
Mhm.
you really can say, this is exactly what the team did. And this is how that played together, and see those lives, or that, that community or that country or that company is totally changed due
Yeah.
to how we worked. The other part is probably very much around ADA.
Mhm.
And I would love that the world goes a bit further towards the Bitcoin standard, but also the ADA standard.
Mhm.
So, I would like to onboard maybe somewhere in around 50 banks worldwide,
Mhm.
where you can basically have structured products in ADA, you can have deposits, you can take loans in ADA. So basically, you add more payment rails and payment service providers, POS terminals, and so on, that ADA becomes much more of a household name,
Mhm.
and maybe even competing to become the world's next world reserve currency,
Mhm.
because I think it has a lot of the things needed, which would make a really good world reserve currency. So that would be a very interesting journey to travel.
Mhm.
And the last but not least would be, as I spoke to you about before, is to have a lot of companies or digital autonomous organizations or people building real applications which they depend on our infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the way we would measure that and see that is not just the media announcement and all that's coming, a lot of very interesting things up, but
Mhm.
we will be looking a lot of obviously also at, let's say, the transaction fees on chain, because when we see the transaction fees not just are rising, but we also see that they start interacting between each other. So it's not just buying and holding,
Mhm.
but it's, due to smart contracts who's constantly being called on and is solving real life problems. And we see that kind of vibrant community coming up around that. So businesses interacting with each other without necessarily the foundation or ISJ being in the middle.
Mhm.
Then that would be that's a trend I'm really much looking forward to.
Yeah. No, the future is so exciting with all of it. Like it just makes me so excited. Like everything that you say, everything that I listen to with the Cardano Foundation updates and Charles Hoskinson's like, everything is just like wow. I get overwhelmed with how much potential everything has, you know. So um but yeah, I just want to thank you so much like for your time. I know that you have a lot of calls and you're trying to be more active in the community and I really appreciate it. Do you have any closing things that you want to say to the community?
No, I think the main message is really, let's start building real-time applications
Mhm.
on the Cardano protocol, and parts of Gogan is already there. I
Yeah.
know that it's not fully launched. Smart contract includers is not there yet, right? But there is parts we can start building on.
Mhm.
So let's go from not just the ADA standard, which is also an interesting part, but
Mhm.
let's also start building real-time applications on the Cardano protocol, and let's start changing the world and enabling the architects of the future and not the victims.
Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Frederick, and I will wrap it up here. And you guys, you can check us out later, and see you on the next episode. Okay, bye.
Bye bye.